everyone! So I am fresh-faced today because I am going to be doing a comparison between the Beauty Blender, this is the original Beauty Blender, and also a dupe that I found at Winners. This is a very inexpensive alternative, but not sure how they measure up in terms of quality and effectiveness, so that's what we're going to be exploring today. And the one that I got was the one that included 2 Beauty Blenders, that's why it's not sitting like pretty inside. I've already used the other one, and I've already discarded the other one because I used it pretty much until it was ripping. So there's one remaining, but usually it sits like really nicely and doesn't roll all around. So there is a sizable price differential between these two products, and I will put all that information in this video. So I've gone ahead and taken out the 2 sponges, and this one is the original Beauty Blender, and this one here is the generic version. So they look pretty similar, although there is a size difference, as you may be able to tell in the video, but the Beauty Blender is quite a bit smaller than the generic version. The generic version is a little more plump, especially in the base. Not sure if you can see this in the bottom, but the Beauty Blender is like very round and very smooth, very much like an egg shape, whereas the generic version has a bit of a ridge around the bottom here, so it's not quite as smooth. Also, if you look at the tip, the Beauty Blender has more of like a rounded tip, whereas the generic version has a really sharp pointed tip. So those are a few of the differences when you look at the dry sponges. The other thing I noticed immediately when I took out the sponges is the difference in texture or the feel of the sponges in my hand. The Beauty Blender is a lot more cushy, I guess, like you can squeeze it and it feels really soft, whereas the generic version is harder, like it's much more difficult to squeeze. So I've gone ahead and wet the sponges, and there is quite a big difference now between the original Beauty Blender and the generic version. So both of them did expand. I would say the Beauty Blender expanded a little bit more than the generic version because they are now very similar in size, whereas before the Beauty Blender was a little bit smaller, or quite a bit smaller, I guess. But yeah, now they are about the same size, but you can tell the quality of the sponge because the Beauty Blender is very smooth, whereas the generic version is very kind of misshapen. So you can see a lot of bulges and bumps, and that happened because I squeezed the sponge and it just didn't reform its shape the way the Beauty Blender did. The other thing is, when you squeeze the sponge, the Beauty Blender is a lot easier to squeeze. As you can see, I can put very little effort and squeeze it until my fist is completely shut, whereas this one is a little bit harder to squeeze because the sponge material is more dense. The other thing to note about these is the weight. The weight of the Beauty Blender is extremely light, whereas this one you can sort of tell that there's still some water remaining inside that I wasn't able to squeeze out because it's a lot heavier. So at first I thought the texture wouldn't be a big deal, even though the generic version was a little bit more dense, but after kind of wetting it and squeezing it out repeatedly, I'd have to say that the Beauty Blender is a lot easier to use because I'm not like hurting my hand by squeezing out the water. I have keyboard hands because I am pretty much on the computer all day every day, so anything that puts less strain on my hands is much appreciated. So in that regard, I much prefer the Beauty Blender already, but let's go ahead and see how they actually work in terms of applying product. So today I'm going to be using a mixture of the Revlon Color Stay Liquid Makeup and the Sita Rice Stem Cell Whitening BB Cream. And the reason I'm using these products is because this one here is really dry. So when I apply it with a makeup brush, you can kind of see the dry patches on my skin. So I thought this would be a good test product, but I want a little bit more coverage, and so that's why I'm going to be mixing these two together. So I'm going to go ahead, mix it on the back of my hand, dot it on my face, and then I'm going to use the Beauty Blender on this side and the generic sponge on this side. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've used these sponges to apply my makeup, and I don't know if you can tell in this video, but I feel I have a little bit more coverage with the Beauty Blender, whereas the generic sponge kind of removed some of the makeup and didn't make it as full coverage. Definitely try it again, but my first impression is that the Beauty Blender did a better job at keeping the makeup on my face. In terms of the blending, they both worked really well. I don't have any cakiness or any harsh lines. When I was using the Beauty Blender, it was a little bit more plushy and soft on my skin, whereas the generic sponge was more bouncy and it was also like a harder texture, so it felt like more firm against my skin. Definitely the Beauty Blender is a lot more comfortable on your skin, a lot softer and skin friendly, I guess. Because I was able to squeeze out most of the water in the Beauty Blender, it was also like a much more dry texture, which I think might be why it did a better job keeping the makeup on my skin. Whereas the generic sponge, it seems to have retained a lot more water. I wasn't able to squeeze out anymore, and maybe that's why it took some of the makeup off, because it was diluting it a little bit with the excess water that's still in the sponge. They were both really easy to use though under the eye. I didn't notice a difference with like the more severe point. This one is a little bit more gentle though on the under eye, but I think that has more to do with the texture than the shape. I do think the generic version does a better job kind of in the crevices around the nose, because it can get in there a little bit better, but the Beauty Blender still can get into little corners, and I know this looks weird, but yeah, it can still get in there. I just think this one does a slightly better job. In terms of cleaning, I found the Beauty Blender a lot easier to clean, because when you're cleaning these sponges, you're constantly squeezing them and wetting them again and then squeezing them again, and this one I just needed both hands to kind of continually wet it and squeeze it, and I just didn't find I was getting a lot of the water out, because yeah, it's just harder to squeeze. So I wouldn't say I have issues with my hands, but my hands do hurt quite frequently. So I would say that for me personally, I would probably invest the extra money to purchase the Beauty Blender, because it's a lot easier on my hands. However, if you don't have any issues with your hands and you don't mind like squeezing those stress balls to get your frustration out, then I would say this is still a pretty good investment, especially because it is so inexpensive and it does a great job at blending out your foundation. It's just a little bit less coverage, I find, so you may have to put on an additional layer. So that is it for my review today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and that you found it helpful. If you've tried both the original Beauty Blender and the generic version, I would love to hear your thoughts. Even if you've tried just one of them, I would love to hear whether you think it makes a difference in your makeup routine and whether you enjoy using these types of sponges. So that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching this video, and until I see you again, please take care and bye for now.